Good.
I was just going to say we're going to pick back up 54.
Minute or two, since y'all all seem to be ready to do a little review here. So, don't treat your Bible. Solomon was given the charge by his father to build the temple. And how long did it take him to get started on the actual building of it? 4 years, yeah. And it seems that he started the preparations right away. In other words, he seemed to take his task seriously and get started right as soon as possible. It took 4 years to actually start to lay the foundation. How long did it take to build the temple? Yes, 7 years to build the temple. Now, he was working on some other projects at the same time, but the temple was his primary focus, and he does complete it in 7 years. When he completed the temple, there was a dedication ceremony that took place, and he gathered all the children of Israel to come to the temple and gather there. All the leaders and kind of the whole nation comes at the dedication of this temple. What's the first thing that he does to the temple? What's that? He does pray. I don't know if that was the first thing. Okay, he's going to offer sacrifices, and I think that probably was the first thing. Sacrifices were offered. That's what I was looking for. He brings the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. When he brings the Ark into the temple, as the priests are coming out of the temple, what happens?
The glory of God.
The glory of the Lord fills the temple. So we see already that this process of dedicating this to the Lord and doing this is not been unnoticed by God. And God shows His approval even by coming in. Again, y'all are not late. They were just ready to review, so we started. And so we already see that things are going well here. And then Solomon is going to begin, he addresses the people on some things, but then he begins to pray. And somebody just kind of summarized some of the things that he prays for. He asks God for what?
Blessings to be upon people if they can continue to obey His commandments and follow, asking His commandments.
Yes, that is one of the things. That's right. How does what's his prayer for the temple particularly?
That people, when they come to the city, see the magnificence.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Of it and glorify God.
Yes, he does pray for that God will be glorified by that. When they pray towards this place, when they come here to settle some dispute, and they come, may justice be done. When they come here to repent because they've been defeated in battle because they've sinned, hear their prayer and forgive. When they come here because there's been some pestilence or some plague because they have sinned and they repent, hear their prayer and forgive and heal the land. When they are taken into captivity because they have sinned against you and rebel, when from wherever place they've been taken captive, they pray towards this temple, what? Hear them and allow them to return and come back. So the idea is that I built this temple for this to be a place where your people can come and petition you and you will hear them. You will hear them. That's the concept. That's what he wants to be accomplished in the temple. When he finishes this prayer, what happens? I think this is what we ended with last time. Yes, fire comes down and consumes the offerings that were on the altar, and the people fall down and glorify the Lord. And so we kind of talked about this. This is God's way of showing His approval for what has taken place here, and in a very visible way. We've seen this before when the tabernacle was dedicated years before, and now God shows the same confirmation when the temple is dedicated. So verse 14 of chapter 8 Is that where we're at? No.
54.
I'm sorry. Yes, my page got turned. 54 of chapter 8. It says, "So it was when Solomon had finished praying all of this prayer and supplication to the Lord that he arose from the altar of the Lord, from kneeling on his knees with his hands spread to heaven, and he stood and he blessed all the congregation of Israel with a loud voice, saying, Blessed be the Lord who has given rest." Now you'll remember that in Exodus and also in Deuteronomy, the promise was God will bring you into the land and he will give you rest. And what Solomon is saying is God has kept his promise. We have rest here. And so he's given rest to his people Israel according to all that he promised. There has not failed one word of all of the good which he promised through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our fathers. May he not leave us nor forsake us, that he may incline our hearts to himself, to walk in his ways and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments which he commanded our fathers. So he says, God has been faithful. God has been loyal in keeping his promise. That's why we enjoy what we enjoy today. And may God be with us and may not leave us. For what reason? Verse 58. What does it say in verse 58? That he may do what? All right. That he may incline our hearts to himself. I love that. Because I pray that God will be with us, that he will bless us. When you talk about that God will be with you and bless you, for what reason? So, well, that I'll be healthy, that I can be happy, that I can... And he says, no, that he can incline your hearts to him. So I pray these blessings so that you will draw closer to God, to walk in his ways and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments which he commanded our fathers. And may these words of mine, which I have made supplication before the Lord, be near the Lord our God day and night. May he maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel, as each day may require. And then verse 60 and 61, that all peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God and there is no other. So, Sherry made the comment earlier that God may be glorified here. As he's talking to the people, may God listen to this supplication so that he may be glorified. So, a couple of things here that I think we should incorporate into our prayers. When we're praying to God, God bless us that our hearts may be inclined to you. Hear our prayers and bless us that you may be glorified. Do you see where the emphasis is there? And I think that's important. Sometimes, at least I speak for myself, my prayers, if I were to step back and look at them, become rather selfish. And God, hear my prayer to bless me. Hear my prayer to take care of me, to give me what I want. And Solomon has a bigger picture here. And that is that we can draw closer to you. That will be what's best for us. And that you will be glorified. That's the ultimate goal. That's really what it's all about. Verse 60, that all the people of the earth may know that the Lord is God and there is no other. Let your heart therefore be loyal to the Lord as he addresses the people. Let your heart be loyal to the Lord our God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commandments as it is this day. Let me just mention one thing that I see here in this section. As Solomon is addressing the people here after this prayer, what I see him say is God has kept his promises. That's why we enjoy what we enjoy right now. That's why we have the peace that we have. That's why we have fire that has just come down and consumed this altar, and we have the glory of the Lord in this great tabernacle. God has kept his promises. Now what's our part?
Keep ours.
That's right. Let your heart therefore be loyal to the Lord God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commandments as it is this day. So there's the heart of the covenant. God is being faithful. Let's make sure we're faithful.
I think Solomon gets it up to this point. He's been taught well that it's a hard thing, that this is what God has always wanted, even from the beginning. And then taking the children of Israel out, it was be holy as I am holy, and he wants that relationship. And I think at this point in Solomon's life, he gets it.
I think you're right. I think we see Solomon at his very best here. I think you're exactly right. You have anything you want to add to that?
Going back to that, he may incline our hearts to him. Certainly he can accomplish that through blessings. but I think even maybe look into the negatives, as Moses said, the cursings. You know, when he was offering his prayer toward, you know, this temple, this house of prayer. You know, when people point their, you know, literally point toward it, point their hearts toward this place and pray, many a times it was mentioning, you know, it was after their sin, and they recognized their sin. How did they recognize their sin?
Times.
Yeah, they suffered. And so, you know, suffering can incline our hearts to the Lord many times. And so what is a negative can turn into a positive, certainly, if we're willing to accept it.
Anything else before we move on?
It is helpful just to think about, it seems like Solomon made this copy of Deuteronomy, which connects the heart and obeying the commandments so often. And here, he understands. So sometimes, at least I grew up with the impression that the law was just about following the rules and your heart didn't matter. And I think sometimes people would look at the way we approach things and say, you just care about the rules and your hearts don't matter. Well, that was not true in the law, and hopefully it's not true of us, that our hearts are reflecting themselves in how we're devoting ourselves to principles. And Solomon, I think, sees it, because there's a lot about obeying commandments in this, but there's also that idea of inclining our hearts. And so it sounds like you copied the book of Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy says that a lot too.
Yes. Very good.
Then the king, verse 62, and all Israel with him offered sacrifice before the Lord. And look at this, is just I think a sampling. This isn't exhaustive, but this is just sampling. Solomon offered as peace offerings to the Lord 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. And so the king and all the people of Israel dedicated the house of the Lord. The same day the king consecrated the middle of the court that was before the house of the Lord. For there he offered, again, more offerings that are not counted, burnt offerings and grain offering, and the fat pieces of the peace offerings, because of the bronze altar that was there before the Lord was too small to receive the burnt offering and the grain offering and the fat pieces of the peace offering. So, you know, all these offerings are being offered. And why is that? Why do they offer these? I mean, they are called sacrifice. Why is Solomon offering these? Is it not an extension of his heart? What the gratification that he's feeling in his heart? The appreciation?
And verse 63 says these are peace offerings. And so you have sin offerings. That's when you don't have a relationship with God and you are trying to restore that relationship with God. A peace offering is when you do have a relationship with God and you're showing that appreciation in that peace offering. And so you see the mentality here is we recognize we are in fellowship right now and we're grateful for that.
I was trying to go back to what, you know, Larson was saying as far as, you know, this wasn't just a mechanical, you know, offering on this occasion. This was expression of their hearts, where their hearts were at this point in time. Yeah, right.
Like, wow, look at the ritual and going through the motions. But we don't see on the inside, but the Holy Spirit tells us what Solomon's thinking of.
Absolutely. Verse 65, so Solomon held the feast at that time, and all Israel with him, a great assembly. From Lebo-hamath to the brook of Egypt, before the Lord our God, 7 days. On the 8th day he sent the people away. They blessed the king and went to their homes. How? What was their attitude? Yeah, joyful and glad of heart for all the goodness that the Lord had shown to David his servant and to Israel his people. Now it makes mention David. Of course, you know, this is, I think, the idea of the promises that were given to David, and now they have been fulfilled, of course, under Solomon.
Yeah, so the temple, you know, long time in preparation, from the time that David thought of the idea of it to the time the Lord gave the instruction of it, all the preparation that David made, that Solomon made, and then the 7 years of building it, it comes to its culmination. God is dwelling among his people. That's the idea in the temple. Things are great. Now, I mentioned that Solomon had some other projects going on at the same time, even though his primary focus was on the temple. So the temple has been built now, and now he finishes up some of those other projects. I want us, we'll hold our place here in chapter 9, but I want us to go back to chapter 7. We skipped this section when we were in chapter 7 because we wanted to go ahead and complete the building of the temple before we dealt with this. But in chapter 7, verse 1, it said, Solomon took 13 years to build his own house, and so he finished all his house. He also built the house of the forest of Lebanon, Its length was 100 cubits. Its length was 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. So a big structure there. And it gives some details on this. It talks about that with 4 rows of cedar pillars, cedar beams on the pillars. It was paneled with cedar. So if we look at, this would have been the city of David. This was the city of David. This was Jabesh, or Jerusalem, when David conquered it. David rebuilt its fortifications, took the Canaanite palace that was there, turned it into his palace. We talked about that. We talked about, remember, from his rooftop he could look down over the whole city. That got him in trouble. But we see that. What Solomon does now, and you remember that the altar that he built from Onan's threshing floor, was up here on what was Mount Moriah. You remember what happened on Mount Moriah years before? Somebody else offered a sacrifice there. Abraham did. Yeah, he offered Isaac there. Well, he ended up offering a ram that was caught in the bush, but he went there to offer Isaac. So what Solomon does now is he expands the city all the way, more than doubling the size of the city. And on Mount Moriah there is where he builds the temple and the altar that would offer all of these sacrifices that we just read about. And then he builds a wall around it, fortifies it, but he also builds other structures there. He's going to build his palace and a place for his wife, Pharaoh's daughter. He's also going to build a court of judgment there. You'll see in verse 7, a hall for the throne and the hall of judgment where he might judge. Here's an artist's rendition of that, of what that may look like. Here's the temple complex. And did you notice when we were talking about all the sacrifices, that all the sacrifices couldn't be offered on the bronze altar that was there because it was too small? So he had dedicated the middle court. I take it to be, it would be outside here. So even this huge structure, all of these sacrifices spilled outside of the inner court of the tabernacle, even out into the middle court of the tabernacle during that time. But the other structures that he built, here's Solomon's house, artist's rendition of Solomon's house, and talking about the cedar columns that were there. The court, he had a court that was held there. A house for Pharaoh's daughter was also part of that structure. And then he had the House of the Forest of Lebanon, which is a cool name. And it would have been a really cool structure to see. The reason it was called the House of the Forest of Lebanon is because it kind of looked like a forest. You had all of these pillars. You had 4 rows of cedar pillars and cedar beams, and this was 45 feet high. I assume these were huge cedar timbers that were 45 feet high that supported this structure. And it had all of these columns of these cedar pillars, so when you walked through it, it looked like you were walking through a forest, kind of. And so it was the forest of the cedar of Lebanon. So elaborate structures that he's building here. And this would be a place, the hall of the throne room was set there, so a lot of official things would take place here as well. And so these were some of the more notable structures that were built here in this new area of Jerusalem to the north of where the city of David was. You have anything you want to add on that?
Just to emphasize, this took 13 years to accomplish, so this was a major, you mentioned a class or two ago that most structures weren't very big. This one's 150 foot long, just the main structure, the main building, the House of the Forest of Lebanon. So that's a major structure.
Yep. And the Hall of Judgment where he judged, it talks about there were all kinds of costly stones trimmed with saws in and out, the foundations, the eave. It was decorated, large stones, some 10 cubit and 8 cubit, costly stones. It was a pretty magnificent structure.
His throne would be there, that we'll read about later.
That's right.
Would be in there as well.
Right. So if you were living in Jerusalem at this time, there are major renovations and expansion going on, and this city is becoming a top-notch city in the world. In other words, we think of Egypt, we go down to Egypt and we see the magnificent temples that still stand today, and think of the pyramids, those type of things, those great structures. In ancient times, when people would have come through Jerusalem and seen these structures that Solomon is building, they would have been like, wow, this is an important city. This is an important city. And what we're seeing is we're seeing the visible display of God's blessing on the children of Israel right now. Not to spoil it for you, unfortunately, the paint will barely be dry on a lot of these structures before we have problems. All right, any other comments about, thoughts about some of the structures taking place here? All right, let's go back over then to chapter 9 and pick up in verse 1. Let me say this. I think this helps a little bit maybe to think about why God speaks to Solomon in the way that he does. Solomon, you notice verse 1 says, it came to pass when Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house and all of Solomon's desire which he wanted to do. So Solomon's been working on this. This is after all of these things have been, and Solomon's kind of at a crossroads in his life.
So he's almost halfway through his reign at this point in time?
Yeah, getting close. How long did he reign? Anybody remember? 40 years. And so we're probably getting somewhere close to the end of that. He's finished a lot of these big structures. And at this point, what are we seeing negative about Solomon? Nothing. Nothing really. Everything has been going really well. But he's had a task that he's been focused on. And most of that time he's been focused on the temple and organizing the people to remain loyal to the Lord, and things have been going really good. But it almost seems at this time, as a lot of these focused efforts are complete, that he has to make some decisions, or what he's kind of at a fork in his life. And what's he going to focus on now? And it's almost like a midlife crisis in some ways. And I don't mean that maybe in all of the same symptoms. But what happens is he loses focus of what he's really supposed to be doing as the leader of God's people. And he begins to focus on other things and explore these other things. And it's at this moment, it seems that God approaches him again and appears to him a second time and speaks to him. And listen to what God has to say. So the Lord appeared to him, verse 2, a second time as he had appeared to him in Gibeon. And the Lord said, I have heard your prayer and your supplication, which you have made before me. I have sanctified this house which you have built, and to put my name there forever. And my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. Now, so Solomon, that's what you've been focused on. That's what you've prayed for. That's what you've worked for. And I will listen to your prayer, and I will bless this place. Now, if you walk before me as your father David walked in the integrity of heart and in uprightness to do according to all that I command you, and if you keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever, as I promised David your father, saying, you shall not fail to have a man to sit on the throne of Israel. But if you or your sons at all turn from following me, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes, which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them. And this house which I have sanctified for my name, I will cast out of my sight. Israel will be a proverb and a byword among the people, and this house will be exalted, yet everyone who passes by it will be astonished and will hiss and say, why has the Lord done this to the land and to this house? And they will answer, because they forsook the Lord God who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have embraced other gods and worshipped them and served them. Therefore the Lord has brought all this calamity upon them. So as Solomon stands back and he looks at all that's been accomplished here, and now he begins to maybe focus on other things, God says, hold on, Solomon. Now you asked me to bless this place, and I've blessed this place. Now, if you will continue to walk in my ways, then you will be established. But if you do not, what will happen? That's right. This house that you're so thankful for and proud of, I will let it go. It will be exalted. Now, I think that's interesting. This house will be exalted whether you're faithful or not. Unfortunately, the way that it would be exhausted if you're not faithful is people going by going, what happened here? What did these people do that this would happen here? And so God's name will be exalted. It can be exalted by people coming by and saying, wow, look how the Lord has blessed this people. Or it can be exalted by people going by, what happened here? And they were unfaithful to God. And they will see God's justice. They will see God's justice in what I do to the land. So he lays before, Solomon's kind of at a fork in his life, and God lays before him the options. The options are, if you walk and remain faithful with a loyal heart, this is what will happen. If you do not, this is what will happen. And I like that God, maybe, I think about, you remember Cain and Abel? When the temptation came upon Cain and his countenance fell because his brother offered a sacrifice that was accepted and his was not. Do you remember what God did? God appeared to Cain, and what did he say? Yeah, and then do you remember what God said? If you do well, it'll be acceptable. And if you do not do well, well, then sin lies at the door. Now, you need to rule over this. And it's almost like what God is saying to Solomon here is, now here are the options. Now, do well, and it'll be okay. And maybe that wouldn't stand out as much, except we're about to see what happens. And we're about to see how that follows up. Any thoughts on that? Do you have anything you want to add to that? Mm-mm. Anybody else have any thoughts through verse 9? Okay.
All right, beginning in verse 10, we have some more of Solomon's acts, his accomplishments. It does say that at the end of 20 years, which Solomon had built the two houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house, that Hiram, king of Tyre, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress, timber and gold, and as much gold as he desired. And here Solomon gives Hiram 20 cities, but it says in verse 12, when Hiram goes to see these cities, what conclusion does he draw about those cities? Yeah. Called cobble, which is worthless. So, we have kind of maybe a little bit of friction here. Hiram feels like he's been hoodooed on this deal with all the supplies that he's given Solomon. But verse 14 does say Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. By my figures, I'm coming up with about $288 million worth of gold, today's currency. It says in beginning in verse 15 through 22, it describes some of the other things that Solomon was involved in as far as accomplishments. Not only building the house of the Lord in his own house, but the Millo, the wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer, all these different cities he rebuilt.
So the fortification and structure around all of Jerusalem, the Millo is mentioned there, a fortification, the wall of Jerusalem, I think that's what's under consideration. Do you mind if I take just a moment on Hazor and Megiddo?
Yeah.
So what's mentioned there with Hazor and Megiddo, Hazor is going to be up here. That was a very powerful city when the children of Israel came into Canaan. It remained a major structure. See, you have this trade route, the way of the sea that comes up. This would be the fortification to protect this major trade route and highway. So that had been an important city for centuries before the Israelites even came into the land. He fortifies that. And if you go to Hazor today, archaeologists have dug down and they have found what they call the Ptolemaic Gate. And Solomon, as he fortified some of these cities and built these cities, he kind of had a trademark gate structure of 3 inner chambers in the gate, and they call that a Ptolemaic Gate. Hazor has that. If you go there today, you can see the foundation of that. Megiddo is also mentioned. Again, another one of those fortifications on that trade route right there. And if you go to Megiddo today, you see the Ptolemaic Gate. This is a model, a reconstructed model of it, scaled model, but you can see that same type of gate structure there. And something else, while we're talking about Megiddo, we'll see this in just a little bit. Interesting thing about Megiddo is what they found were all of these buildings that they think look something like this. Anybody know what a lot of archaeologists, there's some debate about this, some controversy about this, but what a lot of archaeologists think those buildings were? Yeah, stables for horses. Because when you go in and look at them, they kept finding these things right here. Now that you're not able to see that photo very well. Anyone would take a wild guess what that is? A feed trough. What's another name for a feed trough? A manger. Yeah. So when you see a nativity scene and you see a little wooden cradle on the ground, that's not what mangers typically look like in ancient Israel. They were typically hewn out of stone and look like a big water trough of types. But there are a number of these in these structures which have led a number of archaeologists to believe that these were Solomon's stables for the horses that we'll read about a little bit later on. There is some controversy about that. Some say these were just store cities, but it would still date back to Solomon's time when he refortified and rebuilt these cities of Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer.
Millo, I don't know much about Millo other than it was some type of fortification on the north side of Jerusalem. Yeah. It was there when the Jebusites had it, and David rebuilt it or expanded it, and I think Solomon rebuilt it, as it's saying here. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's some type of fortification. You also have some of these other cities, Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, Tamar, and as Lonnie said, some of these store cities and cities for his chariots and horsemen. It goes on to mention that who was the workforce behind all this? Was it Israelites? Yeah, it was the Canaanites basically that were still left over. You remember the treaty basically that was made with them when they first came into the land. And so this is the remnants of those people that were still in there. That was the slave labor. They were the blood, sweat, and tears of all this accomplishment of Solomon. But it does make mention of verse 22, but the people of Israel, Solomon made no slaves. They were soldiers. They were his officials. They were his commanders, his captains, his chariot commanders, his horsemen. You know, we're going to see that Solomon, as we go on, Solomon's going to build fleets of ships, going to be gone for 3 years at a time. There's going to be Israelites on board of those ships that are going to be gone for long periods of time away from home. So, you know, we're still hearing those echoes of Samuel when he first warned the people of what it would be like if they had a king. You know, they're wanting a king, and all they're thinking of is the good things, but what else comes with that? There's going to be a cost of having a king.
You don't have to turn over there, but let me just turn over quickly to 1 Samuel chapter 8 and read that for you, and then we'll think about something together on this, because, yeah, the remnant of the Canaanites are what's doing the backbreaking work. But that doesn't mean the rest of the Israelites are not being put into use in a lot of ways. So here's when the people asked for a king back in the days of Samuel, here's what Samuel said. This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots and to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over his thousands, captain over his 50s, and some will plow the ground and reap the harvest. Some will make weapons of war and equipment for chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive groves and give them to his servants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage, and he will offer it to his servants. He will take your menservant, your maidservants, and your finest young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take a tenth of your sheep, and it will be for his servants. And you will cry out in that day because your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. You want a king? Let me tell you where this is going to lead. This is going to lead to you losing a lot of your personal liberty on this. Give us a king. Okay. And so, now, you had made this point a few classes ago. How do the people feel about it right now, early in Solomon's reign? Yeah. This is a worthy cause. We are willing to donate our time and our efforts. If it means we're going to have to be...
The temple was an earth.
That's right.
You know, that was a worthy cause.
That's right. And maybe the palace would be like, okay, well, that'll be okay. But then we get over to Ecclesiastes, and Solomon said, man, anything that I decided that I wanted, I built. Whether it was vineyards, olive groves, pools, fountains, whatever, anything that I could dream of, I said, hey, let's do this. another project, and it just continued to continue to continue. And just think about this. We've already seen in the temple, you remember that all of the men that had to be gone 3 months at a time, going up to Lebanon to get the supplies there. Well, that's not all that's involved in that. That was some of it. But then in chapter 10 and verse 22, we're going to read of a navy in which people would be gone for 3 years at a time in that navy. And then you think about, you remember how much food he had to supply for a single day, and how he had governors over each region to collect that. Where do you think that came from? He will take 1/10 of your cattle and your sheep and all that. So these people are having to spend months away. They're having to give from their flocks and their herds to supply for the king. And yes, things are great, but that's also tiring. And we'll see that by the end of this 40 years. But we get a glimpse of that here. So we read this and we say, well, none of the Israelites were forced to be slaves. That's right. They weren't forced to be slaves. That doesn't mean they didn't have a lot of responsibility and they were not being taxed and so forth.
You know, with each project that was being completed, Solomon's court, his effort was being broadened, and therefore it was just raising the level of burden upon the people to have to provide for those needs.
Yes.
These people that you were making slaves, weren't they supposed to drive these people out?
Yes. Yeah. Originally, that was exactly what they were supposed to do. They didn't. Good point. You notice verse 26 talks about his navy at Ezon Geber, which is all the way down here. If you can see it, Aqaba, all the way down. You get the Red Sea, all the way down this tip. So Israel is up here, and he gets a fleet of ships all the way down here with Hiram's help. Now remember Hiram, king of Tyre and Sidon. The Sidonians were well known as being having a great navy and being masters of the sea. He hires out them along with his own people to have this fleet of ships that can travel all over to different areas and bring back all of these exotic goods from everywhere. So when we're talking about the people being burdened, it's almost like, well, how could they be burdened? Because we're going to read about the incredible wealth that the common Israelite had at this time. But it doesn't matter if you are overwhelmed if you're overwhelmed with different responsibilities and burdens. If your bank account's really great, but you don't have time to enjoy any of it, it's still difficult. And I think that's what we'll see here.
Going back to this Navy for a second, the verse 28 says that on an annual basis, 420 talents of gold was delivered. I calculated just under $1.6 billion annually, just in gold, was being brought to Solomon there. So, wow. He has a pretty impressive revenue stream flowing in right now.
All right, probably the zenith story of his fame and fortune is the Queen of Sheba. And if you get on the internet, man, you can find there's all kinds of legends and myths about the Queen of Sheba. But here's what the biblical account says about this. It says, when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord. Now, I want you to notice the connection here. It's not just, oh, I hear there's a really wise man. What's it associated with? What's Solomon's wisdom associated with? The name of the Lord. The name of the Lord. She came to test him with hard questions. She came, and when she comes to test him, I don't know that it's like the way that the scribes and Pharisees tested Jesus. She wasn't like trying to find a fault. She just wanted to say, is this real? Could this man really be this wise? Could God be blessing this man this much? So she comes to Jerusalem with great retinue, in other words, with a large company, with camels that bore spices and very much gold, precious stones. So she brings all of this as a gift to Solomon to gain entry, to be able to speak with him. And when she speaks with him about all the things that were in her heart, Solomon answered her questions in such a way that there was nothing so difficult for the king that he could not explain to her. And when the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters, their apparel, their cupbearers, the entryway, all that Solomon has done here, it says there was no spirit in it. In other words, she was like, it's true. As a matter of fact, she's going to say to the king, it was true, what was reported, and I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. However, I did not believe the words until I came and saw it with my own eyes, and indeed the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceeds the fame which I heard. Happy are your men, and happy are your servants who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God who delighted in you, setting you up on the throne of Israel, because the Lord has loved Israel forever. Therefore he made you king to do justice and righteousness. And so she realizes, wow, God really has blessed you in this way. And she uses that phrase, how happy are the ones who serve you and get to hear this wisdom. Remember how we talked about the idea, if you could just be a servant in Solomon's court and hear some of the judgments that he proclaims and some of the wisdom, what a blessing that would be. She recognizes that. Here she is, a queen from a foreign land, comes and hears Solomon and says, boy, it must be nice just to be a servant here and to hear you and to hear these things that you're saying in this. Let me mention something here that is impressive to me. Jesus is going to make a statement about the Queen of Sheba. Do you remember what he says about the Queen of Sheba in the New Testament? It was in condemnation of the cities of Galilee who were rejecting Jesus.
She heard Solomon and accepted the truth about his wisdom and that he really was divinely blessed in his being able to teach. And then, so he talks to them and say, the one that Solomon was just a preview of is here, and you're not listening.
Yes, that's right.
And, Solomon probably didn't even have I certainly didn't have the miraculous signs to back it up. And so Jesus said, a greater display of wisdom and God's approval is here. And unlike a foreigner, which probably would have hit them even harder, that, here we are, the Jewish people, God's blessed people, and they weren't seeing clearly what this woman saw so many years before.
That's right. So if she looks and says, boy, it must be nice just to be a servant and hear your wisdom. And the point that Jesus was making is the wisdom that God gave Solomon was given to lead his people, but now God is here. And a greater than Solomon is here. And God's own people don't even take notice, don't even care. But in times past, people came from a long distance to hear and were blown away. And now, when God himself is here, God's own people don't pay attention to it. And so it kind of puts that in perspective. If we could look and say, oh boy, wouldn't it be incredible to listen to Solomon? Yes, well, think about listening to Jesus. And again, the point that we made with Solomon is we kind of do get to listen to Solomon, don't we? Through his writings. What about Jesus? Yeah, we have 4 books in the New Testament that we get to sit there on the sea of, the shore of the Sea of Galilee and listen to him speak in parables. We get to hear the private conversations that he had with the apostles. And that, yes, a greater than Solomon has come, and we have access to him as well. And we should appreciate that. Anything anybody want to add regarding that? Yes, sir.
In the middle of all this projects that he's got going on, in 25 of his parents says that he went and offered up 3 times a year. Now, so he's fulfilling what God asked him to do, walk in my way. So I think that's what that means. This queen, she know that. She said, God didn't lie to you.
Yes.
So she knew that he was walking in God's way.
Yeah.
Like you said, then later on, she knew that this people would listen.
Right. Yep. Yeah, she was drawn to God through him, and through what God had blessed him with, and in Jesus' day they were not.
Another thing about that, him going 3 times a year, I'm way ahead. But when his wife draws him away, does he keep doing that even after he deals those offers? He'll deal with his wife.
Yeah. Again, we don't. You said I wonder, and I do too, because we don't know. But I take it that he probably did. That he probably did keep doing that, and maybe that's how he soothed his conscience on some of that. I know that's how a lot of Christians do things today. They may be pulled away from the Lord, but they keep attending services because it kind of makes them feel better. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that people do that. All right, let's finish up here with Solomon's great wealth as it's described. You mentioned first of all, I think she brought him in gold, about 4.5 tons of gold when the Queen of Sheba came. That's a pretty elaborate gift. Mm-hmm. Solomon also sends her back with whatever she desired as well. You notice in verse 11 that the ships of Hiram, this navy that he has going out, brings all types of precious wood, almug wood, which I don't know exactly what that is, but apparently it was a rare and costly wood. They made several things out of it, among which were steps for the house of the Lord, and also harps and stringed instruments for singing. And it just talks about that these type of things had never been in Israel before. So this is a time of unparalleled prosperity, and the imports that are coming in are exotic.
He had a collection like no other.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so some incredible things that are taking place here in this. Verse 14, the weight of gold that came from Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold.
I do want to insert here, I think I made a mistake earlier talking about the ships bringing 420. I think the 666 equals 1.6 billion annually.
I wrote down, and I didn't look this up again. I'm trusting my notes from the past, which I've found is not always accurate, but about 25 tons of gold a year were being brought in. That's pretty good. Besides everything that the merchants and the trade that was coming in. Now, look to get this in perspective. In verse 16 and 17, it says he had 200 large shields of hammered gold. So it's like he had kind of the honor guard, or the soldiers, maybe his personal bodyguards or whatever, and they had 200 shields that weighed about 7.5 pounds each of solid gold. We will read about these shields later. They kind of become a symbol and a sign of just how incredibly wealthy he is, that he can equip 200 of his soldiers with solid gold shields. And then, that wasn't enough, he also made 300 smaller shields that weigh about 3 3/4 pounds, also of gold in that. They will only remain in Israel for one generation, and they'll be taken away. So I want you to see all this prosperity that we have, how quickly it will be gone. Why will it be gone so quickly?
They did not keep that.
That's right. Unfaithfulness. Now he makes this throne. This is a artist's rendition of what this throne would maybe like, but it had 6 steps leading up to it. On each side of the step there was a lion that was there. What was Judah's, the sign of Judah, or a lion? Yes. And the throne that he had at the top had lions for the armrest. Nothing like this had ever been made. It was made of ivory overlaid with gold. An incredible.
Ivory of itself was just, such a precious commodity. Of itself, and then it's overlaid with gold. Nobody's even going to see the ivory, and
Yeah. And it says in verse 21 that silver was counted as nothing in that day. And then there's all these things being brought in, all types of exotic animals that are brought in. And verse 23 says, so Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom, and all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. We'll pick up maybe just a little bit here later on, but I want to leave you with that idea. The whole world was seeking Solomon, and Jesus came and said, a greater than Solomon.
Also, maybe let's keep in mind, you remember when Solomon first takes the throne and God gives him a request, what does he ask for? Wisdom. Wisdom in what? Was it just general knowledge? Ruling his people. How do you think that's going right now? Think about that. How do you think the climate within his own people is going at this point in time? As we're talking about the burden that this takes on them.
Thank you for your good teaching. We will finish up this order. Next slide.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.